Okay, good afternoon, big spenders and filthy little skinflints. My name's Danny. This is My Own Worst Enemy, mental health podcast and, well, video podcast as well. So, first video podcast of 2018. So, good to be back, I suppose. So what are we? Something like 2 weeks into January now. So, I've got to ask, how's everybody's New Year's resolutions going? Everything going well? Everyone stuck to them? No, don't worry. Don't feel too bad. I don't think you're going to be the only ones. I think a good example of the way New Year's resolutions tends to pan out is, so a few years ago now, can't remember exactly when it was, I decided that I was going to do a New Year's resolution. I don't usually bother with them. But this year I decided I was going to start running, like not on a treadmill, but actually going out on the streets and running. And went the whole 9 yards, bought the custom made running shoes and like the sort of weird tight sort of bulgy pants and all that. And I remember 1st of January, you go out there, streets are mental. Like you can't move for runners. They're all over the place. Like there's so many runners, you can't run. You have to walk everywhere. And then slowly, as the month sort of went on, you notice the streets were getting sort of quieter and quieter until something like, I don't know, maybe March or April. I basically got all the streets of Stockport entirely to myself, like a bleeding ghost town, because everyone's knocked it on the head. And I think I knocked it on the head after about 6 months as well, couldn't be asked. So, I think that's sort of the fate of every New Year's resolution. So, if you have quit, don't feel too bad. Happens to the best of us. Anyway, whether you have, whether you haven't, stuck to your New Year's resolutions, whatever, I hope generally your 2018 is off to a good start, the future looking bright and all that. I've got to be honest, mine isn't looking so great. Because, it's looking like 2018 is going to be the year when I get less sex than I've ever got in my life since I lost my virginity, which was 1998, 20 years ago, yeah? And the reason for that is, okay, so the other night we sit down for dinner, me and the family, so me, Leanne and the two kids, Roman and Hope, and all starts off like any other dinner. Just sort of chitty-chatting away, small talk, talking about Roman being at school and back at school and stuff like that. And then Roman pipes up. He says, Mummy, I was worried about you the other night. And Leanne says, oh, why, kiddo? What was up? He said, well, I woke up in the middle of the night and I could hear you screaming, oh, 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 really loud. I burst out laughing, right? Didn't know what to think about that. Leanne plays dumb, tries to play the dumb card. She's like, I don't know what you're talking about, kiddo. Maybe I was just like having a bad dream or something like that. And he said, well, I don't think you were. He said, because after a while, you started to scream, oh yeah, oh yeah, oh yeah, even louder. So it can't have been anything bad. And the thing is, I mean, he's at that age now where he's 7 years old. So he's at that age where I can't tell whether he genuinely doesn't know what's going on or whether he's just playing coy, like he does know what's going on, but he just wants to make you fess up to it to sort of confirm his suspicions. Because am I going to tell this story? I'm going to tell this story. Okay, so back when Leanne was pregnant with Hope last year, so Roman would have been like 6 at the time, that's when he started to become sort of very intrigued about the whole where do babies come from question. So before Leanne had got pregnant, we'd managed to sort of fob him off with these sort of vague euphemisms. So it was like, daddy plants a seed in mummy's tummy using a special kiss. And we got away with that one for, I don't know, maybe a couple of years. Maybe he first started asking when he was about 4. But as soon as Leanne got pregnant, he's not having any of that anymore. He wants to get deeper into it. Anyway, this is usually something I'd sort of leave up to Leanne to deal with. But the time he decided to bring it up was when, so his grandparents live about an hour away from here, and we have to like drive down the motorway, and it was just me and him in the car, and this was the moment he decided to start really, really digging into how babies were made. So he starts asking more technical questions. So he wants to know what the seed really is. He wants to know where it comes from, what it looks like, and how does it actually get into mummy's tummy and all that sort of stuff. So he's asking me all these questions. And because the sort of they were technical questions, and I'm sort of tripping over my own logic, and I'm not making any sense, and he's tripping me up as well, saying, but what about this and what about that? And eventually I just sort of gave in, and it was like, right, okay, here we go. I'm doing this. I'm just gonna go for it. I'm gonna explain it properly. Anyway, so sort of speaking of euphemisms, the words we used to describe the male and female anatomy back then, and I didn't choose these, by the way. I think these came from the future in-laws. This was their idea. They decided on wombat for the male parts and flower for the female parts, which I've got to say as well, I've only just the other day, I've seen a video of a wombat, right? I thought a wombat, because of this euphemism they were using, I thought it must be some like sort of hairless rodent that maybe resembles a penis. But a wombat's like a big sort of beefy koala bear type thing. So, I don't know, not appropriate for a 6-year-old, maybe when you're in your 20s, but not at that age. But anyway, that's sort of beside the point. Anyway, so those are the euphemisms we sort of went for. And I thought, well, I'll try and be as sort of technical and as honest as possible while avoiding being sort of too adult and explicit. So I basically said, the wombat goes in the flower with the seeds in the wombat, right? And the wombat goes in the flower, and it puts the seed in the flower, and then the seed sort of climbs up into the belly, and that's how mummy gets pregnant. And I'm watching his reaction to this in the rearview mirror. And he's sort of looking down, thinking to himself, nodding, but you tell he's still sort of mulling it over. And it's like, oh God, what next? And he says, but Daddy, how does the wombat get in the flower? And I thought, oh, hell no, I'm not going there, that's too far, not doing that one. So I just said, it just does, kiddo, let's just leave it at that. And again, I'm watching his reaction in the rearview mirror, and he's obviously dissatisfied with that answer. I can see the sort of cogs turning in his little 6-year-old brain. And then after about 30 seconds, he looks up at the rearview mirror, looks at me dead in the eye, and he's like, oh, he goes, I think I know how the wombat gets in the flower, Daddy. And it was like, right, okay, go on, how does it do it? He says, I think the flower goes and sucks it up like a vacuum cleaner. I nearly crashed the bleeding car on the motorway as soon as he said this. And I've got to be honest, I've never corrected him because I've just been too mortified. Still don't know how to deal with that one. Anyway, I think he's on to us, basically. That's the problem. So it's looking like, yeah, if I'm lucky, I'm going to be getting laid maybe 12 times this year, once a month, because our choices basically now are, we can either do it sort of all subdued and quiet, which, like a couple of Mormons, but no thanks, I'll give that one a miss. Downstairs basically looks like a childminder's house. There's sort of kids toys and teddy bears and stuff all over the place. I don't want to be rolling around in that mess. That feels just creepy. Or we can, once a month, when we manage to get rid of the kids and ship them off to the grandparents for the night, that's when we're going to have to squeeze it in. So yeah, lucky me. Looking forward to this year. Anyway, if you've seen the title of this week's episode and noticed it's the year of less, don't worry, this episode isn't just me sort of pissing and moaning about my sex life for the foreseeable future. It's just a happy coincidence, I suppose. Well, not a happy one, but a coincidence nevertheless. So, anyway, my guest this week is Cait Flanders. Cait is a former binge consumer turned mindful consumer. Between 2011 and 2016, she was the author of the popular personal finance blog, Blonde on a Budget, where she documented her journey out of $28,000 worth of personal debt. She is currently the author of CaitFlanders.com, where she writes about issues as diverse as travel, health, minimalism, and social media. If you'd like to follow Cait on Twitter or Instagram, I think Instagram is where she's more active. She's just at Cait Flanders, but it's Cait, C-A-I-T, at Cait Flanders. You can visit her blog, which is CaitFlanders.com. Again, C-A-I-T Flanders.com. If you're enjoying this podcast, it's bringing you any sort of value and you'd like to help support it, you can donate or subscribe from as little as £1. Just go to myOwnWorstEnemy.org/support, and any support is always genuinely and massively appreciated. So anyway, with all that said, let's jump right in. Please enjoy my conversation with Cait Flanders. Okay, Cait Flanders, welcome to the podcast. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited that we're finally having this conversation.
Yes, well, actually, we'll jump into that in a minute. What would probably best start is if you could give the listeners a little bit of a sort of a brief introduction to you, who you are, what you do. Basically, when someone asks you at a party, what do you do for a living? How do you answer that question?
Okay, so it's funny. If I was just at a party, I would probably stand there and go, "I'm a writer."
Right.
But I've
Well,
been
that's it.
writing.
So that's like the honest answer, isn't it? The straightforward answer. But what would be the sort of the boastful answer? Well, actually, now you come to mention it, I'm a
So I've been writing a personal blog for just over 7 years now. I started it in 2010, which feels like a lifetime ago. And I started blogging in the beginning because I was documenting my journey getting out of about $30,000 of consumer debt. And I did that in 2 years, and then just sort of noticed that the blog, like as life goes on, and your life changes and the challenges you're dealing with change, it just very naturally sort of became documenting a few other experiments I was doing. So one was realizing that I really wasn't being that intentional with my money, and so I decided to do this thing where I wrote about a year-long shopping ban. And I went on to do that for 2 years. And I also got rid of about 75% of my belongings. And I just talk a lot about intentional living now. So and consumption tendencies, like our consumption habits. So I do all of that, and then I would go that I'm a writer because my first book is coming out in January 2018, which still just sort of feels very surreal.
Yeah. So actually, well, let's sort of let's dig into a couple of things there. I guess. Firstly, so this blog of yours was the Blonde on a Budget blog. That right?
Yeah, yeah. In the beginning, I called it Blonde on a Budget.
Right. So was it? What was the sort of in the chicken and the egg scenario? There was it. You'd started a blog and then you started to do experiments on it, or did you start doing the experiments and then start blogging about it? And what was your first experiment that you did?
Well, I would say that it was definitely that I started the blog to document getting out of debt. So originally, you actually might find this interesting. I wrote anonymously because I didn't want anyone in my real life to find it or know that I had debt. And so I started it. I used LC as my name, which is technically my initials. Caitlin, or Kate is my middle name. So I went by LC. And yeah, I used to basically all I used to publish were these weekly spending reports where it would literally say, like, on Monday I spent $2 at Starbucks. On Tuesday I spent it again at Starbucks, and how much I spent on groceries and my bills, and also how much I was putting towards debt. So I don't even know if it was so much of an experiment. It was just like I was very heads down, had to pay off my debt. uh, and also the part about, like, writing anonymously and just not wanting anyone to find it was because I was super ashamed. I was really ashamed of how much debt I had. I just sort of felt like I had ruined any chance I had of having, like, a healthy financial future. And I don't know, I used to be really mean to myself. Like, it's always the voice in your head versus what you're putting out there, but I was just not in a good place when I realized I was maxed out. So it definitely started just with wanting to pay off my debt.
Well, that is interesting actually that you say you did it anonymously, because I would have assumed that if you sort of, I mean, you could do this sort of experiment, try and spend less or whatever, just off your own back. But I would have thought that people blog stuff and vlog stuff or whatever, document these journeys because it's a way of holding yourself accountable. Any kind of audience that you've got, which is sort of watching your progress, and you have to be honest about where you're at. It's if you're out and about and nobody knows about your frivolous spending, then you can sort of get away with it and let yourself off. But when you've got an audience that are holding you accountable, it might make you second guess. It gives you a bit more leverage. But then, like you say you did it anonymously. So I'm just wondering what the impetus was to document it when you haven't necessarily got that sort of social pressure against
Y-
you, if that makes
Yeah,
sense?
that's a great question. I don't know if anyone's asked it in that way before, but I love it because I will say I did build an audience slowly. It was just other personal finance bloggers to start. And a lot of them used to write anonymously back in the day, like a lot. Like now, people have sort of, there's been this big transition in blogging where there were a lot of people who wrote anonymously in general, like about all kinds of topics. But there's been this like shift where everyone is now like an expert. And so when you go to their site, the first thing you see is their face and I'm an expert at XYZ. And so people are just much, and like they make a living from it, right? Like they're making a living from their blog or whatever services or products they're offering. So I think that I just like remember the good old days, I guess you could call it, when we were all anonymous or mostly anonymous, and we were all just supporting each other. Like it was this kind of uncomfortable topic still that a lot of people didn't want to admit that they were dealing with. And so I did find them. I found them because I read their blogs and then I commented on their journey. They came back over and commented on mine, and it was really small at first. Like there were only a few people, but I truly felt like I did have an online support system. And there were things like when I was talking about doing those weekly spending reports, I did used to not make purchases knowing I was going to have to write that.
Right.
Because even if it was just a few people, the blog somehow did make me feel like I had to be accountable. And then definitely as like the audience grew and kind of I really tried to foster a community there, like everyone who came on and commented and also shared parts of their stories. I really tried to make sure that the blog remained a safe space, which involves things like I would never let the trolls come in because you'll never see them on my blog, but I have them. I just don't let their comments come through because I'm like, this isn't just my space. Like if you don't like me, that's fine, but no one's going to come in here and be mean to my readers. And so, yeah, I would say that it started very slowly, and it's still slow growth. Like I don't have millions of followers or anything like that. It's still like a I don't know, small to medium blog in the grand scheme of things. Like when you see all the really big ones out there. So I mean, through all my experiments now, I've 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 known that I needed to stay accountable to them, and then eventually, like it only took about a year and a half for me to put my real name on there and to tell my family and friends. So then they knew everything I was doing too.
So, okay, let's sort of dig into this original story first, because this sort of I get this sort of correlates between this first experiment with getting rid of the debt and then this later experiment, which we'll sort of get into the thick of, where this year of less, which the book is based on, which was sort of it was about um spending less and wiser spending, but it was also about getting rid of clutter and things
Mhm.
like that. So just pulling it back to this original idea, this first experiment with the debt. Did you say it was in £30,000 worth of debt or something? Was it
Okay, well, we would have to do the conversion for pounds. So obviously, you can tell by me, I'm in North America, I'm Canadian.
right?
So it was about $30,000 of consumer debt in Canada. I don't even know what the exchange is right now, but
It doesn't. It doesn't matter what the exchange is, Kate. It's pretty. I mean, it's pretty bad. I'm interested in how did you get to that point in the first place, and then what was the tipping point for you where it was like, oh, I mean, it sounds obvious that there'll be a tipping point,
Mhm.
but do you remember your moment? Was there a day where you were like, oh Jesus, I'm really sort of making a mess of things here, and I need to sort it out?
Yeah, so how I got there was years and years of just saying yes to anything I wanted to. There were times, like I would say I've been in, or I was in debt from the minute I got my first credit card. So I was 19 years old. And I used credit cards like just like they were free money. So I always made sure that like I had enough, like I was earning enough to pay my rent and all my bills. But I basically used credit cards for everything else. So whether it was just a lot of dinner and drinks with friends. Also used to drink quite a bit, and I was the kind of person who I would just feel like I should or was happy to kind of pay for rounds of drinks, or like I would put my credit card down at the bar and just let everyone put their drinks on me. Um, so there was just a lot of feeling like as long as I could make the minimum payment, then I was fine. Um, but it was a story I used to always tell myself, which is like, I'll pay it off one day. And I mean, eventually, obviously, I'm now debt free, so I can say, yes, one day did come. I eventually became debt free, but it it was just for a long time. It was just a story I told myself to make myself feel comfortable with how much I was overspending. Like I never saw my balance go down; it always went up in all those years. So, and I, I can talk about the tipping point, but if you had something you wanted
Yeah,
to
well,
add on.
there is something in there. In in the book, The Year of Less, I was quite surprised by it because I expected it to be just a kind of like a financial advice sort of guidebook. And there is those elements to it, but there's a very personal autobiographical element to it as well, which I wasn't expecting. And so I'm going to ask you these things. I'm assuming you're comfortable talking about them because you're quite candid
Yeah,
about it in the book.
yeah.
And I don't know if this is just, I know it's a bit of a cliche and I'm not trying to like psychoanalyze you or anything, but I was just wondering whether there was, you talk about in the book about sort of being very insecure when you're in your teenage years, especially, and
Mhm.
really wanting to be liked, wanting to fit in and things like that. And so I was just wondering if there was any correlates there with this, with these spending habits. Like you were saying, you put your credit card down just to let everybody sort of buy what they wanted and things like that. And yeah, well, I'll leave it at that. Whether there was any sort of correlates between the insecurities that you had and you were dealing with and the spending.
Absolutely. I think that it's not something I knew in the moment, right? Like in those moments and in spending a lot or in putting my credit card down, that was unintentional in that I wasn't self-aware enough then to realize that that was what I was doing. But now being, 5 years sober, I can look back and see all of those things and how they sort of came together. So definitely for me, what I have realized is that I wasn't good at many things when I was young. Like, I tried to play a few sports, wasn't that great at them. Like, the only thing I was really good at was reading books. Like, I just
Yeah,
wasn't
me too.
what yeah, like, I didn't have that much else going for me. Um, and I remember I started drinking when I was really young. Like, I drank for the first time when I was only 12, and when I was then 13 and started high school, I remember telling friends that I had drank, and all of a sudden, a lot of people thought I was really cool. And so it just
Mm.
for me became this thing that I was good at it. Like I I'd never also wanted to miss parties because people would always say that like they had the most fun with me, or they like the party got better when I showed up, or just all these things, and so much of my self-worth was wrapped up in the fact that I was good at partying, and people liked hanging out with me when I was drinking. And so I absolutely think that that's true. I think that it truly now I can say like 5 years sober, I only just feel like I'm starting to get some confidence in what my skills are. Like I think yeah, been a long struggle slash journey of really trying to figure out who I am and understand why people would want to be friends with me. I think that that's something that, oh, I'm like gonna get upset. It's definitely still a journey, I will say. So it doesn't surprise me that a lot of my spending was based around that.
Yeah. Are you okay? Do you want to take a minute or?
No, I'm good.
Okay. Well, sort of, I guess, sort of, I don't want to forget my question about the tipping point as well. So
Yes,
I'm going
we'll
to
remember
throw that
that.
one out. What the tipping point was. But also, I'm interested as well, still on this subject,
Yep.
when you stopped being the person that was buying drinks for everybody and And also when you stopped the drinking as well, did you notice a change in your social life, positive or negative? Did people, the people that you were sort of supplicating, did they fade into the background once you weren't buying the drinks anymore? And did the sort of the genuine friends come to the fore, so to speak? I hope that makes sense.
Yes, I think it's funny because I get that question about the shopping ban, like, oh, when you stop shopping, like, did people stop hanging out with you or something? And the answer to that one is not really. But when I quit drinking, absolutely relationships changed. And I remember it being very hard in the beginning, just the ones that you lose. You definitely, probably two friends in particular who don't like really reach out or spend that much time with me anymore. Um, but I also, again, it's taken time to figure that out, but they're on their own journey. And for me, we couldn't have maintained the same kind of friendship because it always revolved around drinking. And so we couldn't have maintained those relationships. So I don't even know if I remember it being so much as like people stopped coming around, but over time it has felt that way. Like where I've reached out, and because we used to still do things like maybe we would go work out sometimes or go for a hike or something like that. So we would do other things sometimes, but you really learn that like for some people what they care most about is the getting together for drinks because they don't all of a sudden don't want to go for the hike or kind of hang out anymore. Like the partying is like more important to them, and because I'm not in that world, I just don't get invited to hang out very much with them. But the better part of that is also true, which is that I've found I now have deeper relationships than I've ever had before. I feel like so many of my friendships were very surface level when I was drinking. Um, a couple, like my best friend Emma, who I talk about quite a bit in the book, she's someone who's been with me through all of it. I think because our relationship never really revolved around drinking, like honestly, we might have partied together like 5 times in our lives. It never revolved around drinking, so I think it makes sense that ours was always good through all of these things. Um, but ones that maybe we did drink together before a little bit, or have just both grown up in our own ways. Like I've had a lot more friendships that are deeper and more meaningful, and that you can do this, that you can talk about these things and talk about the growth you've made and cry about it and like laugh about how stupid you've been, but be happy that you're all on the other side of it.
Yeah, I guess it also makes it easier for like I say, there's that other side to it as well. It's not just the fact that you're the person who's the sort of the center of attention, and so that's why people are around you, but you're also drinking to kind of mask your social insecurities. And I guess when you stop drinking and there is people still around you, when you're not that party animal anymore or whatever, and people still stick around, I guess it makes it easier to then just be yourself around those people. You realize that maybe those people, like you were saying, maybe they just like you for you. And I
Mm-hmm.
guess that's quite a revelation, that, I guess, if you've been stuck in that shell for so long.
Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting to it's always like moments like that, like where I just teared up. It's always those weird moments where it will come to fruition, like just I'll kind of here and there think about how like it's shocking to me sometimes that people would want to hang out with me or stuff like that. But I will have a moment. It's always like when you're in person with someone and they'll just say something, or you'll just realize like how that memory that you're now creating, which could be so simple. It could be like a breakfast you're having or just hanging out on the couch watching TV. Like it could be anything. And you'll realize you're going to remember that more than you remember any night of partying. And so I think that's another part of it is like not just that people want to hang out with you, but I think when you can see that um, you almost see why, like you can see why it's life could be better without the partying, right? Like this stuff is so much deeper and better than just like the drinking part for me was just very superficial and surface level. It obviously didn't help because I'm 32 and 5 years sober and still dealing with self-worth and confidence stuff. So the drinking obviously didn't help me get my self-worth. It's just what it was wrapped up in for a long time. And yeah, anyways, I love this topic.
Okay, so again, I'm not going to let this one go. So if you could just
Yeah.
quickly tell us about this, let's say your revelatory moment. This has gone too far, and also, and then skip us ahead to that moment when you'd finally got down to zero as well. To give us the kind of two polar opposites there.
Yeah. So I will say I knew for months leading up to sort of the tipping point that things were getting bad. And I think that if anyone's been in that situation, you probably have gone through that too. I think that every single month I would just sort of get this feeling like, especially when I had my credit card statements coming in, um, I started ignoring them. Like not ignoring them completely, but I would do this thing where I would just rip open like a corner of the envelope and I would only look inside to see what the minimum payment was. I never wanted to see the full balance because I knew it was getting closer and closer to being maxed out. So, yeah, I think like for months I knew it was going to get bad. I was going to get um to my tipping point. But and so I think then what feels worse almost is like the story going through your head is like every time I would go to make a purchase or swipe my credit card for something, I would think and have this like gut feeling like I shouldn't be doing this. And I thought that for months and months and months, and then eventually, I became maxed out. And so the day I really remember the most was it was May of 2011. And to take it back even a couple months before that, in January and February of that year, I had decided that I worked a pretty um, safe job at the government. I worked for the provincial government, and it's kind of one of those things like once you're in, you're in. Like you'd have to do something really bad to get fired. And but I was really unhappy in my job, and um, just felt like it didn't align with like who I actually wanted to become. Like, and so what I'd always wanted to do was get into publishing, and I didn't know what capacity. Like sometimes I'm having all these like flashbacks of like it's so weird that I'm in publishing now, but like as an author. Like, but I wanted to work in publishing. I thought it would be so cool to like start from the bottom, work my way up, maybe become a literary agent, so help authors get book deals. Like these were all the things that I had wanted to do. And so I took a leave of absence from the government, and I saved up a bunch of money, and I decided to move to Toronto, which is the biggest city in Canada, and it's also where the majority of the publishing industry is here. And so I was like, I'm going to get a job in publishing. Like I've got all this money in the bank. I'm going to get a job in publishing, and I'm going to try and start over. So I took a 6 month leave of absence, and I left in February. And I did get there and apply for a ton of jobs, but didn't really hear back from anything. And instead, what I did was drink away all my savings. So in like a very short amount of time, like I think it was around the first week of April that I had to book a one-way ticket back to Victoria, which is my hometown. And so I was there for 2 months, like 8 weeks. Um, and that was it. When I got home to Victoria, I had no money. Um, I had to ask my parents if I could live in their basement, which to paint a picture of it, like my parents didn't have a bedroom for me anymore. And so to live in their basement, it was actually my bed on the floor of our old garage that my dad had converted into a kitchen years and years and years ago. My grandma lived with us for a couple of years when she moved out from across the country. And he had converted the old garage into a kitchen for her. And so for me to move home, they were like, yeah, you can stay home for a few months, but like you can literally sleep in the kitchen. Like that's like we can put your bed down in there and whatever. And so I remember like walking in. I'd been home for a couple of days, and I walked in and I had a few credit card statements that had gone there when I was away. Um, and I finally opened them up and just like realized I was within $100 of being maxed out. And I remember standing on the floor, and it was like old concrete floor. It was so cold. And then I like sit on the bed and I'm like looking around me, realizing like I'm living in my parents' second old dingy like kitchen. Um, but yeah, I was within $100 of being maxed out on my credit card, and I also had $100 left in the bank. I had about 600, but 500 was for like minimum payments for all my debts. So I had $100 left, and I had told the government I wanted to come back, but they couldn't take me until the end of May. So I had like 6 weeks where I had to make that 200 pretend dollars like work with, and like there was just no point. There was no other option at that point other than to start paying it off.
I've got to say, it's, you see, so knowing the outcome of this, it's reassuring because we know Cait pays the debt off and everything works out
Mhm.
fine in the end. But when you're in that situation, like you say, you're in an old garage on a concrete floor, you've got no money and obviously nothing to show for all this spending, and you're in a job and you're in a job you hate. What what did the future look like for you there? I mean, because there are some people that would have that sort of determination, that, like you say, at that moment of realization where you say, "I've got to do something about this." For some people, that might be like a challenge, and it's like, right, fuck this,
Mhm.
I'm gonna throw myself at this problem. And for other people, it might be, it might be exciting. There's something romantic about ending up in that situation, isn't it? Because the worse off you are, the more potential you have in a sense. But I'm just wondering what that experience was for you. What did the future look like to you then?
So, I mean, I started the blog and I wrote anonymously because I felt awful about it. I can't even tell you that I thought about the future at that point because all I like for the first few weeks, especially like sleeping on in the old kitchen and stuff like that, like I used to cry myself to sleep. Like I felt like such a loser. And so then it's interesting too, like, I mean, trolls and stuff are always going to make comments, but I remember in the early days, like after I'd paid it off, people were like, oh, sure, you got to live at home for a few months, though. I'm like, yeah, that wasn't exactly like a luxury. Like, it wasn't exactly like sitting by the fire and having like a cozy life. Like,
Yeah.
and my parents weren't helping me they helped me because I didn't pay rent for a few months, but they weren't helping me, giving me money. You know what I mean? Like, it was very much like this was it. It felt awful. And so I used to cry myself to sleep. Things I used to worry about the most were like I'm the oldest of my three siblings by 8 and 10 years. So I've always sort of grown up feeling like I had to be a role model to them. And I remember just feeling like I had screwed that up. Like, why would they look up to me? I didn't want this for them ever. So like, what had I just role modeled for them? Like, it didn't feel good. So I can't say that I thought I had any kind of good financial future. That's why, like, I wish I could go back and say not as many mean things to myself as I used to say back then. Keep in mind, I was still drinking back then too, and um, I think first steps for me were literally like once I got my first paycheck again, it was just like this realization that I had to put everything I had towards the debt. And I wasn't allowed to have any fun money. And like saying it sort of to myself in those terms, like I didn't feel like I was allowed to have any sort of, I don't know, just free money. I still drank a bit, but like it would be like a $10 bottle of wine and just stuff like that. But I pretty much stopped going out then. Um, and yeah, I don't know. Definitely didn't feel exciting or romantic. It didn't even feel like a good challenge. It was just like, this is what I have to do. I sort of would come up with numbers. Like, I'm like, I would love to pay off $10,000 this year, but like, I didn't actually know what I had never budgeted in my life. I didn't know that I could do that. And just sort of every time I got paid, like put as much as I could towards it and just hoped that I was doing it right.
Was that was you, were you sort of very much winging it, or had you sort of laid down some sort of spending and saving principles that you used along the way?
No major principles. I remember like so the $10,000 thing was one where I was like my parents said I could live at home for up to 6 months. So I was like, I wonder if I could pay off 10,000 in 6 months, and just did the rough calculation, and it's like I would have had to pay like $1,700 a month or whatever towards debt to make that happen. And so I remember coming up with that number, but truly because I had never budgeted, not actually knowing if I could do that. I knew based on my income, like it would, I earned enough, but I'm like, I didn't really know what the rest of my numbers looked like. I really never used to have a good understanding of how much I spent, even on like owning a car or on my groceries. I never knew how much I was spending. So it was sort of just this number that I threw out there. And then it wasn't a rule, but I would say the only thing tangible that I really did during that time was I started tracking my spending so that I could figure out those numbers. Because I had, like I said, I had never budgeted before, but I was like, the only way I'll be able to do this is to create some awareness of like how much um I'm I'm spending, and like figure out a realistic budget. Because I could write one and be like, yeah, I'll spend X amount on groceries or X amount on gas, but like it's best to create a budget with numbers you actually use, because then you can typically get to the end of the month feeling good about it. That's a lesson I learned later, but it's just something that I'm glad I started with right away. I'm glad I just started with tracking my spending, because also naturally in doing that, I started to see numbers I wasn't happy with what I was spending on, and then slowly started to cut some things out.
And before we move on to this year of less experiment, again, do you remember getting to zero, and how
Mm.
did that feel? Was that a big achievement, or was it just, more of a relief? What was that for you?
I think the relief more than anything. I remember um, I had yeah, it's like I sort of originally when I started, I was like, maybe I could pay it off in 3 years. Like that felt pretty good to me. So that was sort of my first kind of thought in my head. As time goes on and you do start to make progress, then I was able to be like, actually, I could probably do 2.5 years. And then at the end of about a year and a half, I was like, I'm pretty sure I can pay it all off in two. Like, I think I could do this in just another few months. So I think, yeah, I remember getting to the end and just realizing like I was about to make that last payment. Um, and it did just feel like a huge weight off. Like, it didn't feel like I had accomplished anything. I actually remember doing an interview with a newspaper in Canada here, and they asked, like, oh, how does it feel to like do this thing? And I was like, I don't know, like I just feel like or she was like, you've had a major accomplishment. And my genuine answer, and sometimes like as I'm saying this out loud now, I'm wondering if this had more issues to do with like my self-worth and confidence stuff. But I was like, I didn't really do anything amazing. Like, this isn't an amazing accomplishment. All I had done was try, like I'd done something people are trying to do all the time. And so I'm like, I don't know. It didn't feel certainly like an accomplishment. I was just like really glad for the first time in my life. It was also really um, exciting but confusing. Like, what would I do with all this extra money now? Like,
Mm.
and I think that's actually what the problem became for me, is that I didn't really have a goal for what was next. And I also, in the way that I paid off my debt, I had no balance. Like, and balance being in life, right? Like, it was just pay off your debt, get to zero. And so I didn't really have any goals or like thoughts for what I could do. I just got to zero and I was like, oh my gosh, like it was this weight off or sense of relief, but I had no idea what to do next.
So what did you do next? Like you say, all this extra money, and like the world's your oyster now to an extent, and you've cut all your ties.
Yeah, I mean,
What next?
well, I went on my first solo trip. It was short. I just went to San Francisco for 5 days, and that felt that felt really good because I when I was young, especially like getting out of high school, I'd always wanted to travel more, but I truly had never had the money for it because I was always spending it on partying and then, eventually maxing myself out. So I didn't have the money to travel. And so I went on my first trip and that felt great. But then I sort of just like went back to spending all my money. And I didn't go back into debt, but Okay, so like for reference, and you've read this in the book, but when I was paying off my debt, there were months where I was putting up to 55% of my income towards debt repayment. And when I was then debt free, I would get to the beginning of a month. I used to write these budgets and I would share my numbers at the beginning. So they're actually kind of weird to look back at now, but cool too, like cool that they're there. And so I would share the numbers and be like, I think this is what I can do with my budget this month. And I would always want to save at least 20% of my income. And my thought was just save it for retirement. Like, but I didn't really have any other goals than that. I was like, it'd be nice to save more for retirement. But then I would get to the end of the month and I would find I typically only saved about 5%, and was lucky if it was like up to 10. And then every month, like not feeling good about that. I was like, I know I can do better. So then every month I would just tell myself I was gonna try better. But again, the not having a goal part, it just made it like again, kind of going back to like anytime someone asked me to hang out, I would say yes. Anytime someone asked if I wanted to go away for a weekend or something, I would say yes. Um, and it did feel good. Like in a lot of ways, it did feel good to be able to say yes again. But then it didn't feel good to never save. Like I got to the end of a year of being debt free, and I probably only had maybe a couple thousand in savings. Like maybe I was still very much like living paycheck to paycheck. And yeah, that didn't feel good.
So is that what sort of what was the impetus for this new experiment then? So this year of less, which I'll let you explain exactly what it was, but this there's similarities between this new experiment and the old one with the debt, and so I'm just wondering what was the inspiration for it, and does it was it in any way to try and answer that question of having no goals now that you've got this newfound freedom?
Yeah, I think like I love that you asked about the tipping point for the debt because I think that there was a tipping point, much less dramatic than the debt one, but it was so interesting. So my family's always talked about money. Like we're very open about this stuff, and I don't think I'd have any interest in personal finance if my dad didn't always talk to me about it. Um, but I remember my family having this conversation one day, and we were kind of bugging my sister about some money that she had spent. She was only like 19, no, 21. I don't know. She was really young at the time. And we're kind of bugging her. She'd spent like $500 on a new camera. And I remember, like, as her big sister, like the words out of my mouth were just like, yeah, but you live at home. Like, you don't need to be spending all this money. Like, she was a student. I'm like, you shouldn't be spending all your money. And then she was like, yeah, but I save 20% of my income so I can spend the rest on whatever I want. And I was like, whoa, what? Like, how has my sister figured this out before me? How has she, like, she saved 20% of her income? And mind you, like, she's on a part-time minimum wage job. So I'm like, okay, like, she did have $500 to spend. She didn't have a credit card back then. Um, so I remember having, I don't even know if that's a tipping point, but the problem was that the words out of my mouth then were like, yeah, but do you need 80% of your income or could you live on less? And then it was one of those moments where you're like everyone else is talking and you're sitting there thinking like, how did those words like how did I just give that as advice? But I've never asked myself that question.
Right. So yeah, preaching not what you practice.
And then like it just like was an idea that started percolating. Like I'm sitting there going, like I'm spending let's say 90% of my income every month. I'm like, do I need to be doing that? Like where is my money even going? Yeah, I can look at my budgets, but like truly, where is my money going? And do I need that much? I don't think I need 90% of my income to live every month. And so from there, it just sort of started. I started thinking about what I could do, and it was a couple more weeks before I decided to do. Like I called it a shopping ban. It, Sometimes I still think the wording is wrong for what it was, but
So what sort of stuff were you buying? What was that 90% of your income going on that you questioned whether you actually needed it?
Um, well, I think part of it was going out a bit too much. I was sober at this point, but going out a bit too much, just for like dinners or breakfasts and stuff like that. But I did a lot of mindless spending, and it was all habits I had built. So a big one for me was books. And I do read, but I don't read as fast as I would buy. And so I was someone who, anytime I thought of a book, like if I just heard of one, I could hear about it on like the radio. I'm like, well, that sounds interesting. I would just immediately go onto a website and buy it.
Yeah, I'm guilty of
Um,
that with the one click purchase button on Amazon is lethal for that. For books.
yes, yes. Well, and this is why, like, this is not normal advice that I would ever give out, but I'm like, I actually am really not like, I'm not a big believer in having Amazon Prime. I've never had it and I'll never have it. Because I think it just promotes that. It promotes like the idea that you do need it within 2 hours. It's highly unlikely there's that many things you need within 2 hours. And you especially don't need to be paying for it to come early if it is just an impulse purchase. Like not having Amazon Prime stops you from making a lot of impulse purchases. That's my side rant. But so I did a lot of mindless spending. So with books, it was bad. I also like I was never a big shopper. I think that that's a huge misconception about sort of who I am. Like people will write articles calling me like a reformed shopaholic, and I don't identify as that. But I was very, very impulsive, right? Like I would, like I said, with books, if I was out with friends, like if we were going through the mall or even traveling, like you think of souvenirs or something, like you just I would very quickly tell myself stories about like why I should buy something, and I would just buy it without question. I never hit pause to like ask myself if that was something I actually needed or would actually use. So I just bought stuff anytime I thought of it. Um,
When you were
and
saying things like going out for dinner and breakfast and things like that, and you were doing that too much,
mhm.
I'm interested how you sort of quantify that. So what is too much and why is it too much?
So I think that answer is going to be different for everyone. I would never try to say like some people should spend more or less than anyone else or whatever. For me, what felt like too much it's checking in with yourself. Like knowing my numbers, I could look at my budget and be like, when I was paying off my debt, I did go to restaurants occasionally, but my restaurant budget was like 75 to $100. Like it was literally like maybe once a week, right? And then all of a sudden in being debt free, somehow my restaurant budget was like 250 or $300. So for me it was always just a number and like whether or not I felt good about it.
So are we
um
talking about is this restaurant bill, is this going out with friends, or are we just talking about can't be asked cooking, going to a restaurant to eat?
a little bit of both. I definitely
Right.
am not that comfortable anymore buying takeout if it's just for myself. And those things, again, I had just let them become habits. It's like, yeah, if I just didn't feel like cooking, or if like Friday night somehow always became pizza night and stuff like that. But it's like, I don't need to. And it's not that it's bad to eat takeout, but it's like, I could either make a pizza for pretty cheap myself or buy a frozen one for like $5 or less. And it's like not that much better to go and get it at a restaurant, and I'm going to pay 3 to 4 times that.
I've got to say, I'm thinking about pizza night here. Love pizza night
Yeah.
here. But
Yeah.
when when do you know whether you're just sort of being a bit of a killjoy and thinking too much about the money? Do you know what I mean? Because there must be a line
Mhm.
somewhere where you are being too frugal, and I'm just wondering
Mhm.
how you gauge that for yourself.
Well, it's interesting because I don't think I'm actually that frugal. And I say that because if you looked at my numbers, I still like now I probably spend about 150 a month on restaurants. So I'm not anti-restaurant. For me, it has become I will I'm fine going to a restaurant if I like if it's a social experiment or sorry, a social experience, right? Like if I have a really great group of creative women here in the new town that I'm living in, and so we will go for breakfast once a week all together, um, and just talk about work, talk about anything we're struggling with, anything we could need some help with, or just talk about the things we're working on and like how much fun we're having and like celebrate it with each other. So to me, I will always say yes to that breakfast. I'm never going to say that I shouldn't go out to eat. Um, it's and I also won't deny myself like a takeout per se, but I just like it's really just for me. Like I don't feel that good about it when it's just me. Like
Mm.
it for me, I'm like I do enjoy it so much more if that's something I'm sharing with people, and it's not even a night out, but like, just if it's a bunch of people coming together, and that just feels better to me. So I think it's again very different for everyone. I don't It's definitely not a numbers game either. Like in I would say restaurant wise, I have had it go up to like 250 a month again here and there. So it's not like I restrict myself to certain numbers. It just has to feel good. I don't know how
Yeah,
to
I've got to say, Kate, with
I'm the
sorry.
worst, sorry, with like sometimes I think I'm the worst with financial advice because I'm always like it comes back to feelings, but that's like what it is for me.
No, actually, I was just going to say, you know what? When you're doing these sort of interviews, I think this is one of those things where the people listening to it, they want that little soundbite or that little rule to follow.
Mm-hmm.
And but the truth is, with some things, like how when you were just answering that, and I think when you're taking the piss. Do you know what I mean? It is an emotional thing. You
Mm-hmm.
feel it when you're taking the piss. You know when you're doing it, and I suppose that's the best rule to follow. But I'm interested in and let's not forget as well, there was this element of getting rid of things that you already possessed as well.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just interested in I'm guessing you'd, by this point, because you're, sort of a famous blogger by now, I'm guessing you've kind of hammered out some general principles that you were following for this challenge. So if you could just sort of take us through those
Mm.
for both what the spending and with the throwing things out, especially with the latter. I imagine that's something that a lot of people are gonna struggle with. Can't get rid of this coat. It cost me X amount. I've never worn it, but I can't get rid of it.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, let's make sure we talk about that specifically. But so I would say, so the rules that I set out for myself were, and again, keeping in mind, my thought was just like, I don't think I need to be spending as much as I am. I do believe I can live on less, and I want to be saving more. I didn't know exactly for what yet, but I was like, I'm certainly not happy with where I'm at right now. So like, how can I figure out what's next or figure out what I want to work towards? So what I started with was the rules were things I was allowed to buy. You could basically call it consumables. So groceries, gas for my car, toiletries, anything I ran out of. So I couldn't stockpile. I couldn't go and like buy a bunch more just because they were on sale. But if I ran out of it, of course I could go buy it. Like if you run out of deodorant, you can go buy yourself some new deodorant. So I anything consumable was okay. And then the other list was things I was not allowed to buy. Um, I guess consumable still, but it was things like I was not allowed to buy more books. At that point, I had over 50 books I hadn't even read yet. So I was like, and I don't even know if I could get through that in a year. So I'm like, I don't need more books. No magazines. I never really bought magazines regularly, but I used to buy them a lot if I was at the airport. So I'd buy one before a flight or something, but just never really got that much from them. So like no magazines, no more notebooks, pens, like office kind of things. And just because I had enough, like I could look around my home and be like, I have enough. And they may not all be like perfect or look a certain way or whatever, but I definitely have enough paper to write on. I don't need more. Um, no electronics, things around the house. I couldn't buy just things like candles. Like again, I had some, but I was like, I don't need to be spending money on this. Um, and no takeout coffee. So I could still go to restaurants like on occasion, but no takeout coffee. And for me, that one again was just like I work from home. It's not even a social thing. Like, and I'm spending more than $100 a month on takeout coffee. Like, I didn't feel comfortable with that number anymore. So I was like, I make good coffee at home. Like, I know that I can make coffee. So I decided to add that one. And then the other rule that I set for myself was I sort of called it an approved shopping list, but it was a few things that because I was doing this for a year, right? So I could look ahead and sort of see a few things I would probably need to buy. One was like I didn't even own a pair of like proper kind of fall or winter boots, and it rains a lot here. So I was like, I need a pair of boots. Um, I needed, oh gosh, I had to attend 5 weddings that year, and I'm not someone who dresses up either. So I'm like, I need an outfit for these weddings, just one that I'll wear to all of them, but I need something appropriate for all these weddings. And I also knew that if I could save enough, I really wanted to buy a new bed because my bed was like 13 years old at that point, and it was not comfortable and just something, again, I sort of would tell myself like I can't afford a new one. And then learning like the truth is if you save for it, you can afford it eventually. And so those were all the rules that I laid out.
What do you think is the trick there for? Because the obvious distinction being made there is the difference between wanting something and needing something. You know, like sort
Mhm.
of just sort of preference on versus necessity, if you like. And of we trick ourselves, like I think you were saying before, you talk yourself into needing something, like books.
Mhm.
So the books, for instance. What's the self-talk for you when you hear about that book on the radio and it's like, oh, now, I mean, all these other books, maybe I won't I won't read them, but this one really does sound interesting. What's the self-talk where you go, no, no, like I'm not doing it. What's the trick, the knack to it?
So there were okay, two things really helped. One thing that helped with books was I did start using the library more. Because it wasn't that I wasn't allowed to like read other books, I just couldn't buy anymore.
Hmm.
So if the library had it, for books specifically, that did help. I used the library a lot that year. Um, but again, that's something I used to do as a kid, but then didn't throughout like my late teens and 20s just because I had money, so I thought I could buy everything. But then really realizing like you don't have to own thing. Like owning the book isn't what adds value to my life. Reading the book is what adds value. And so really realizing I don't need to own those things. As long as I'm getting them, if I really want them, as long as I'm getting them, it doesn't matter if I don't keep it forever, if I only own it for 3 weeks.
Hmm.
But the thing that helped me the most, and we can talk about the clutter then, is that at the beginning of the challenge, I actually took inventory of like the things I own the most of. And so with books, even though I thought about buying them a lot, I could still remember that I had owned 55 I hadn't even read. And so
Yeah.
again, it was just an awareness. Like it's not like it was no negative self-talk. It wasn't anything like that. Like it was just really being aware of the fact that I had spent money on books. I did own a lot, and so I didn't actually need another one. If the library had it and I could get it, great. But like I didn't need to buy more because I hadn't even used most of what I had.
Hmm. Okay, so yeah, take us into this. So we've touched upon it there, the clutter. So you've
Yeah.
cluttered up your house with books, I'm guessing, and so but there's other things as well. And I know this there's a tricky one. So my missus struggles with this, with shoes that were purchased that were probably expensive about a year ago. They've been worn once and never worn since.
Mhm.
Dresses that don't fit anymore, and but they've never been worn in the first place. But she can't bring herself to get rid of them because one day I'll slim down into it, or one day I'll find a use for it, even though I've
Mhm.
not managed to find a use for it for the past 2 years. So again, what are the rules for clutter, and what is the self-talk for talking yourself out of
Keeping
talking
it.
bollocks, basically? Yes,
Yeah.
keeping things you don't need.
Yeah, I think, um, it it was a little different. I kinda did it room by room. So, like, I started in my bedroom, so very much the, like, clothes, shoes, any kind of accessory. I started with that, and I think for that specifically, I also had stuff that, had fit when I was lighter and stuff like that. And so I used to tell myself I was gonna keep it because I would fit into it one day. And I think, I was like it was quick at first. It was like this quick, go through everything, and I would try stuff on to see if it did fit. But if I hadn't worn it in like the past 6 months, I, I didn't need it. Like if I couldn't actually look at it too and think like I could wear this at X, like a very specific event or something, like then it had to go. I just so it sort of started with that. There were
I've got
still the
so okay,
items.
just to stay on that a
Yeah.
minute. For you, the, it's that moment, isn't it, when you sort of you stood there with it and you're thinking, can I get rid of this? At the moment of making the decision, like, yes, I'm going to get rid of it. For you, was it more that you've sort of played a psychological trick and you've not been able to come up with a reason to keep it, and so it then makes sense, like, okay, it makes sense, it goes, or was it still like, you still had to be disciplined and force yourself to get rid of these things?
Yeah, so I'm glad you asked because it was different for every room. So clothes were easy for me because I don't care about clothes. Like I
Right.
think it was one of those realizations I had even just as I was starting it. I could look at because what I did was now it's like the Marie Kondo thing, which that hadn't actually come out in North America yet at the time. But I literally dumped all my clothes on the floor and on the bed, and it was just laying there like in two piles. And I could look at it and be like, I never wear this stuff. And really being realistic with myself, like I am always and have always been someone who only wears like the same few outfits every week. Like if you saw me now, like I pretty much am always in black leggings and either this or flannel. Like I just and I always have boots on. And like that's just what I look like all the time right now. And that'll probably change in a year. Like, but it's pretty consistent. Like I'm throughout the week, I wear the same stuff. So I could really look at that and just did this check in with myself. It was kind of like a no BS approach to it, right? Of just being like, I literally never wear this, and I don't need it. I don't need it. So the clothes were easy. Also, I wasn't a huge clothes shopper. Like I had a few things that still had price tags, but looking at them, it was something like maybe my mom bought it for me, and I did feel like a little bad getting rid of it. Um, but that was a feeling I'd had for months. And then the day that it came to finally decluttering, it was like, oh my God, I'm so sick of feeling bad about this. I'm never going to wear it. It just has to go. So clothes were easy for me. It did get harder with books, and a weird one was toiletries. And again, that's where I'm like, it's different for everyone. But toiletries are usable. So like if you I was someone like people always gifted me like shower gel or lotion or like things like that
Yeah.
because they knew like I liked certain scents, and so like if they just saw that scent out there they would just buy it for me. um and again, so I had a lot of this stuff and I kept it for a long time because it and still struggled to get rid of it because I'm like I do like this, but just being really realistic again of like it's actually not exactly the right product for me. It's nice that someone bought it for me, like thinking of me, but maybe that's not the right kind of lotion, or there's something about it that just didn't feel right. Um, and so it's weird that that one was harder for me, and then the books too were hard. But I think because I did declutter, I got rid of about 33 books, I think. Um, but I think something that made it easier was that I donated basically everything. So in that first summer, like just getting started, I got rid of 43% of my belongings and I donated everything. I sold like a few bigger ticket things, or things I knew I could get like $100 or $200 for, but otherwise I donated everything, including and realizing anything like a toiletry that has not been opened can be donated to like a women's shelter. So
Right.
there's all kinds of ways that you can get rid of stuff that are helpful for other people, which I think just made it easier.
And with all this stuff gone, did you feel better for it? And I don't just mean in a sort of conceptual sense, like I'm doing the right thing here. I mean it more in that sort of the idea of sort of tidy house, tidy mind. So, for instance, we've just taken all the Christmas decorations down the other day, and the room, for me, it just feels less busy. It's just it's a more calming environment to be in. I don't know if that's all a bit woo woo. I need to sort of speak to
No,
someone on
no.
that. It's that, but yeah. What do you think about that? And what was the result of that for you of getting rid of all this stuff?
Yeah, so I think the first summer, because of getting rid of 43% at first, that felt good right away in the sense that um, I did notice like my home just felt more like me. Like it just felt um, like it was only filled with things I actually liked. And there was just, I don't know, in a way, like it makes sense. There was less to clean, which is nice. Like, and not even just clean, like wiping surfaces, but when you have a lot of stuff, you're kind of constantly organizing it. And it was like that all went away. Like everything was just in a place and it felt really good. Um, what happened as time went on, because I ended up getting rid of more and more stuff. Like at the end of the first year, I got rid of 70% of my belongings. And so it was about a little more than halfway through the year that I did another kind of bigger purge and got rid of more. What felt better then was that I realized in the first purge I had done, I had kept a lot of things that um, I had once purchased for like the ideal version of myself. So, or just like projects I really thought like if I did them. So example, like I had bought an expensive camera and a bunch of stuff for like scrapbooking, like to put all my pictures together. And I kept that because I really wanted to be the kind of person who would do that. Like I really wanted to be the kind of person who would do that project. But then, we're 6, 7 months into it and realizing I'm not going to do that. And it feels worse to hold on to those things because every time you look at it, you feel bad. And so eventually just having to say, like, I'm not going to be the kind of person who does that. Like, who knows? Maybe when I'm 50 or 60, that'll be like some passion project or something. But me right now, and the me who bought that camera years ago, like, that still doesn't interest me. And so once I got rid of those things, in a way, it sort of felt like you do have to let go. Like you're letting go of sort of, I'm not going to be the girl who reads all the classic novels. That's just, I would like to say that I will be, but that's just not who I am. And just being very realistic of like what kind of books actually interest me. So it's like you have to let a piece of that go, let a piece go of like, I'm never going to be that creative photographer. Let a just all these different things go, and that was harder. But then going into my home after that, it really felt just like a positive place for me because all those projects were gone that every time you looked at you felt bad about. And it's the same thing like when you do hold on to like clothes that don't fit anymore, it doesn't feel good. Like it doesn't feel good to look at those every time. You're just like, oh my god, I'm fat now. Like you just don't feel good about it. So just letting it go is like just a interesting way of being able to accept yourself.
Was there any sort of unexpected hurdles that came up for you? Any sort of challenges that you didn't anticipate
Like in decluttering.
in decluttering, in the shopping ban, in any part of the project?
Yeah, I mean, decluttering, I think in this weird way, it was mostly easy for me. I definitely went through challenges that reminded me I was a much more emotional spender than I realized. So I went through a breakup about 3 months into the experiment and definitely found a lot of that talk coming back in of like I would see clothes that I somehow thought would make me look better, and I felt like shit back then, right? So it's like I'm like, oh, like maybe if I bought that, I could feel a bit better. Like if I looked better, I might feel better. Or I almost talked myself into buying a new cell phone during that same period of time. Like this will make me feel a lot better because it'll like my phone was slow and was bugging me. So I'm like, that would feel a lot better. Um, Trying to just kind of do things that you would think would lift your spirits a bit. And so I definitely went through that with the breakup. Without a doubt, the hardest part was 7 months into it. I found out my parents were getting divorced, which was very unexpected. And like, I just grew up in a house that my brother, sister, and I never saw that coming. And so it was interesting, like, sometimes I still feel a little weird about it because I'm like, I was so upset by that. And like, I was an adult child. I was 29 years old. Sometimes I think maybe it's weird that I was as upset about it as I was. But that shook me a lot. And it didn't even so much make me want to shop, but I actually thought about drinking a lot back then.
Mm.
And I was about, gosh, I'm so good with dates, but sometimes I'm not. I was at least uh, two, 2 and a bit years sober for sure at that point. Um, but yeah, I definitely thought about drinking then.
Having completed this and the other challenges as well that you'd done before, but particularly this one, because this is the one that the challenge that the book's based on. But also, like we were mentioning before, there's this autobiographical aspect to the book, and it's sort of self-evident that you've included that because there's some sort of connection or correlates between your past, what you were going through and what you were going through at the time of this experiment, and the way the past sort of influences the future. And I'm just wondering, more so as a direct result of this experiment, where you're at now, what were the benefits of doing this? How has this changed you and benefited you, if that makes
Yeah,
sense?
I think, yeah, yeah. I mean, I remember getting to the end of the first year and just feeling like I really knew who I was for the first time. And so I was, yeah, I think like 2.5 years sober at that point when I finished the first year. And
Well, Cait,
um,
that's huge. I mean, that's a big declaration, isn't it? That's a big realization to have. And I'm just wondering, what do you think it was about that experiment that helped you uncover that gave you that realization of finally connecting with who you actually are?
yeah, so I think part of it was what I said in the decluttering, like the second stage of that, of like letting go of all the stuff I had dreamed up of who I would become or whatever, and just really accepting myself for who I was and like whatever my interests are, those are my interests. And like it's not going to please everyone. And like you know, it's, I don't know. I think I'm only having this realization now. Like, I think sometimes I used to think like people would find me more interesting if I was the person who read the classics or if I was a better
Yeah.
photographer or like whatever. You just think like, because there probably are people who would think you're more interesting, but then you're like, you can't please everyone, right? Like, and you have to be true to yourself of like what actually interests you and don't waste time doing things you don't want to do. So I think that was part of it. I think the other part was for the first time in my life, I had taken time before making basically any decision. Like I had always been very impulsive or compulsive. And it was that year was the first time where I had really ever stopped to question what I was doing, if I really wanted to be doing it, if it served me, if it served anyone around me, like, and what do I really want? Like I had never asked myself those questions. I always would just do things either out of obligation or to be liked or I had never stopped to just say like what do I want, like what am I interested in and what do I want out of daily life, like longer term. Like I had just never done that. I was always acting in the moment. And I think, yeah, the act of pausing and just like now I talk about it and can see it in a sense of it is being more mindful and then being more intentional with the things I'm doing. But truly, it was just the act of pausing. I had never paused before. I had never really stopped to think about just the answers to any of those questions. I was always just in the moment, doing whatever would felt good in the moment, and never paid attention to how it would affect me in the long term, if that makes sense.
Yeah, well, we sort of talked about this in the email, and I was wondering if that maybe that's got anything to do with. So we were booked to speak about mid-December, and
Yeah.
just before we were due to go on, you emailed me and said can't do this, and you said your anxiety was through the roof, and you hadn't slept well because the book's coming out. Is it already out, or is it coming out soon? Is it the 14th,
It's
16th, or
a
something?
January 16th, so
January
soon.
16th. Yeah, so the book's coming out, and you're sort of doing all this work towards it, and you were just very honest in the email and just said, I can't do this. And what was interesting was, throughout December, I had pretty much all my interviews that were lined up got cancelled. 4 in total got cancelled. But without calling anybody out, yours was the only cancellation which was an honest to God. And I could tell, it was a very
Oh
honest
yeah.
situation. I can't do this. Instead of, I got the other ones where someone comes up with sort of the lame excuse, and it's just it's so transparent, that
Yeah.
it's embarrassing. And I'm just wondering if that's got anything to do with, like what you were just saying, is just being genuine, being real with yourself, and like you were saying, because you could have said to me, something's come up, or my
Mhm.
computer's not working. We got that one. But you said, my anxiety's through the roof. I'm tired. I'm stressed out. I just
I
feel like everything's
think
getting on
I
top of
actually
me.
said, I think I actually said I can't stop crying. I'd cried for like an
Yes, you
hour
did.
that morning.
Yeah.
So,
And but it's quite a brave thing to do, because I mean, you sort of you I guess the older incarnation of yourself may have felt like you would be setting yourself up for embarrassment for maybe admitting
mhm.
that. So I'm just wondering if that sort of honesty is, like you say, has come about as a result of this.
I don't know about honesty. I will say, just to preface it, is that I think I was comfortable writing that email because I knew it was to you and I knew the types of things that we would be talking about. So I felt like I could be very honest with you. If it was, I don't know, someone like in just the personal finance space who wanted to talk about just the numbers or whatever, I might have been not said something like that. But I was like, I don't want to sit on this call and just like, number one, look like I've cried all morning, but probably cry some more, which I still did anyways. But like, I just I really felt comfortable saying that to you. I think that it's it's or like the reason that I'm more comfortable doing that now, I think, is because for the first time in my life, I've actually started to set better boundaries for myself.
Mm.
That's something I was also not good at. And again, like it makes sense if you look a lot of past behaviors of mine. It makes sense that I didn't have personal boundaries in basically any relationship I had, and really just with myself. I didn't have sort of an understanding of who I was and how I operated. And I think that it's been years of like these experiments. I started therapy finally in 2017, and I think all of that has really helped me see that I will do better if I do create some boundaries and stick to them. Um, so for that one, it was just like knowing that I wouldn't have a good conversation if I tried to go into, like, if I forced myself to try and feel better. Like I was like, I just need to deal with this. And I cried. I'm so glad we didn't talk that day. I cried all morning. Like shortly after that, I called my friend Anthony, and I laid on the floor and just bawled and like laughed at myself too, because I'm like, I know this will pass and that it will just be one memory of this whole experience. But like today, it sucks. Today, it's not a good experience.
How are you feeling now? Like, because I mean, this, with a book launch coming up, it's one of those where, um, you could be opening a Pandora's box here. You can't sort of preempt the level of success that it might have. So, how are you feeling about it? Are you feeling excited or trepidation, or do you know what I mean? It seems like it's quite a big
Yeah,
thing.
it's a big thing. I think for my anxiety, it's been the toughest because, like you just said, like it's full of unknowns, especially because it's my first book. I've never done this. So I don't know what to expect. Um, so it's been an interesting experiment, like you could call it an experiment, or it's just been an interesting experience to walk into where I can't predict anything. Like I'll have friends even be like, "What are you doing in January and February?" I'm like, I don't know. Like I can't plan right now. It all feels, um, yeah, it's tested my anxiety for sure. I will say, the toughest part, and one of the reasons I was so upset in December was that the extra test to my anxiety were that all these little things came up where the book was actually being distributed really early. So Amazon.com, so just in the US, I don't think anywhere else, on like December 9th, I think it's not supposed to come out till January 16th. I think it was like December 8th or 9th, it like changed some setting on their website so that it was available now. And so I have all these friends being like, "Oh my God, I'm so excited to get it on December 13th." And I'm like, "What?" I'm not ready for that. Also because there's work that needs to be done all the way up to when it comes out, including at the back of the book, there's a page that's like my website slash community. None of that stuff was ready. So I was just feeling all this pressure of like, I'm not ready. And like, why is everyone screwing this up? And like asking other friends of mine who are authors, like, has this ever happened to you? And everyone's like, nope. And I'm like, don't tell me that. Like, tell me this has happened to you too. Um, there were also parts of the process where like my publisher or just other people like helping with the book would like suggest things that I should do to promote it. And I kept taking all those suggestions kind of as facts, like I should do that. And so it was putting this incredible amount of pressure on me, not only just to get a lot of stuff done, but what I realized was to do things I didn't want to do and to do things that um, they're not things I normally do, like things like giving advice on like how to save money on this or that. Like I don't do that. I think that I've never done that, and that's just part of who I am now. Like I don't ever want to say like you should do this or this will help you because it's that kind of advice is not true for everyone, right? Like you can't just give blanket, especially with finances. You can't just give blanket statements of advice like you should save 10%. Like that's not realistic for some people. And so I kept just feeling like if I was going to do these things, it would take me down these wrong paths, and I'd become known for something I didn't want to be known for. And so it goes back to the boundary stuff. Like I had to have those breakdowns, like the crying on the floor. I had to have those breakdowns, and then conversations with friends to say like, I don't know. Obviously, I don't know how to launch a book. I've never done it before. But I don't know what that the way I do it is going to mean it has any amount of success in the beginning. Like I can't push myself to kind of do some of the things I see the experts do, but I have to believe that the way I do it will work for me. And so even if it's slower, like even if it doesn't get a lot of interest for a while, or I don't even know, like whatever it means, I have to just be okay with that. And I realized I didn't have to push myself to do everything at once. Because books also, they're not like blog posts. Books are around forever. Like how many books have you read that came out years ago? Right? Like you don't always just read what's available new now. You'll hear about something way later. Like I just started reading a book that a friend of mine gave me. I wanted to read it back in 2014, and he just gave me his copy. Right. And so I really have had to realize like this is one of those things that's around forever. And so I can do this slower. I don't have to pressure myself, and just also have to kind of trust whatever's going to happen is going to happen. But I still on my end have set some personal boundaries and have to do what feels good to me. So
Okay, well,
I don't know totally how I'm feeling. I still have some anxiety, but like I'm feeling good about the boundaries I've set up.
right. Well, before we plug away at the book, I'm going to subject you to my quickfire questions. Everyone has to go
Great.
through this, I'm afraid, before we finish up. This first one
I can
sounds
deal.
like this sounds like a terrible question to ask you, but I'm going to ask it anyway. It's do you, apart from your own, do you have any book recommendations for people on
Mm.
this topic or anything else you feel would be of value?
Yeah, okay, so let me think. Um on this topic, I would say that okay, so my friend Brooke McCallery, she is in Australia, and she has a podcast called the Slow Home Podcast. So she has published two books. I think the international release dates might not be everywhere yet, but for sure, I think Destination Simple would be a great one, and that's the one that came out first, and I do believe it's out most places now. In July of this year, I know her second book, it's called Slow, is coming out in North America, and both of those have been great. Great in ways for me of like just kind of figuring out not only the boundary stuff, but like what feels good to me. Really honoring that, like honoring what feels good to you. And they're both about kind of living a slower or just simpler and more intentional life. So both of Brooke's books have been great and very timely, just even for me, because yeah, the topic of slow living and stuff's been really important to me this past year and just being even more intentional. So her stuff has been great. Um, I mean, there's probably lots more, but those are the first two that come to mind.
Yeah, it wouldn't be a good idea to start listing off a load for people to go out and rush out and buy, would it? That'd be a terrible idea. Um,
But you can go to the library, or if you bought one, you could share it with friends. So I'm definitely like, I think it's also like as an author now, you understand how helpful it is when people do buy, but even requesting it at the library is very helpful for authors. So you don't actually have to buy it with your own money. Even requesting it, having your library purchase a copy is just as good. So
or if you can't resist, buy it on Kindle and it doesn't take up any extra space.
true. It's true. Yeah.
Okay, what, if anything, keeps you up at night? What worries you?
Yeah. In December, I would have said the book coming out early, or just not being able to get enough done. Um, I will say right now, I don't know that it so much keeps me up, but I'd say my worry right now is I don't really know how I'm going to make money in 2018.
Right.
And I know in the sense the way my business is set up, I generally make a good chunk like November, December, January. So I know for January I'm going to earn a good amount of income and it'll be enough to keep me going for a few months. So I'm not stressed, but it feels very unknown right now.
Mm.
I don't I just don't know. So it's a weird space to be entering, especially as someone who like it is weird for me to think about. Like 5 years ago, I was barely getting by on just my salaried income. And so, yeah, it's a weird, it's like I'm at the polar opposite. I'm not sure where the money's coming from, but it's like I have a little bit of anxiety, a little bit of just, I think it's going to work out, whatever it is. But as a planner, it's very sort of hard to live with day to day.
Well, I guess, even if 2018 turns out to be one with zero income, you could just, that could be your next experiment and just write about it for 2019, I guess.
Like the
Um,
girl with no money.
yes. Okay. What's the best piece of life advice anyone's ever given you?
Hmm. Um, I think it's something I've really only thought about recently, but or like the first thing that comes to mind is some of the stuff my dad has said to me over the years. My dad's a sailor. I'll preface it by that. He says everything. So like that is also why there's no topic of conversation that's off the table in our family. He just says everything. But I think the one thing he did always say to me, and he used to say it in a more crude way of like you have to look out for number one or something like that. But eventually as like time goes on, and also I think I've softened him a little bit, he will just say like you have to look out for yourself because not like no one else will, but like you know yourself and what you want better than anyone. And so at the end of the day, like you can't expect that things are going like everyone's going to do things that the way you want or that it's all going to work out. Like you do have to actively work on the things that you want. And I've taken that and to like a piece of advice and attach it to all kinds of areas in my life. Like even a few years ago, I was in a car accident and I had this all this residual pain that no doctor seemed to understand, which is hard when you have chronic pain. Doctors can't see it all, right? Um, but I always knew that there was more to it. Like they were like, oh, it's probably just something you're gonna have to live with. And I was like, no, like I know there's something more. I want to get an MRI done on my hip. I need to know something is wrong. And then got the MRI, and it's like at the bottom of the all the paperwork, it's like, yeah, like surgical consult is advised. And I was like, I knew it. Like no one else was going to do that. So it applies to all kinds of things, but I think just um yeah, knowing you have to look out for yourself and just take care of yourself and ask for the things that you know are important.
Okay, final three. What mistakes do you continue to make despite knowing better?
I would say right off the top, like just mindlessly consuming television and still having too much of an addiction to my phone. Um, so those are things I do actively work on. Like I'm aware of them and self-aware of my behaviors, but still, yeah, like it's like you know better, but you don't do better yet, or like you slowly start to do better.
Outside of family and career, what investment of time or money has brought you the most joy or fulfillment?
Therapy. Yeah, I don't even know if I would have had an answer to that like a year ago. I started going to therapy in April of 2017 because my anxiety was so bad. I'm not kidding when I say there were 2 days there where like I could barely even look out the window. Like I was so my anxiety was so out of control. And I finally contacted a therapist, reached out, started seeing her the next day, and yeah, it was one of those things. I was so grateful that I had money in the bank to be able to pay for that. Because for the first few months, I spent, I don't know, five, six, $700 a month on therapy just to get started. Um, and I will never regret that ever.
You've surprised me with that answer, Kate, because I thought you was going to say like hiking or walking. I've got to say, I've got to recommend your Instagram feed. Some of the
Mm,
because you're it seems to be proper into walking and hiking and stuff, and some of
yep.
the places you've got up there, it just I don't know where it is you're going, but some of those places look absolutely amazing. And as a sort of recovering agoraphobic, it's yeah, I'd like to get out to some of those places myself one day. So I thought that was going to be your answer. But that maybe come a close second.
It would definitely be second, I guess. It's funny. I think maybe it wouldn't have because that's just part of life now for me. I wasn't always outdoorsy. That's definitely something I found in probably the first year, first or so year of being sober. I found that I just felt like the best version of myself when I was outside, and just felt it makes me calm. Like even when you run into things that like I live in bear country, you do see black bears here, and so it's not always the most relaxing. But it's I think yeah, just because it's such a way of life, I wouldn't have thought of that right away. But yeah, I think also the thought of investment always makes me think of money, but that's not always true, is it? Like you can just make an investment through your time and
Well,
spending
that was
time
that was
outdoors.
yeah, that was in the question: investment of time or money. But
Yeah, like so of time for sure, spending time outside. I try to do that every day. I can't always when it's absolutely pouring rain because it rains a lot here, and you have to be geared up to go out. And you just because if you don't go out in the rain, you might not go out for months. Um, but I don't go out in the like today. It's heavily raining. It is very dark out, so I may not go outside today. But otherwise, it's something I do all the time.
okay, well, the final one, the big one, is what do you think is the key to happiness?
Um, I think it's probably or something for me is like accepting that it's not something you're going to feel every day. Like you can't chase it and then just get it and you're going to feel it every day. Um, I think it's accepting that you will have moments of happiness and and just really enjoying them and knowing that not that it's fleeting, it's just that when it happens, really take the time to enjoy it and I think yeah, giving up the chase. Like I don't think it's something that you can chase down. I don't even like the idea of like, oh, I'm going to do this so I can be happy. Like, what does that even mean? I think it's really just acknowledging the moments when you are like, figuring out how to notice them and just enjoy them while you have it.
Okay, Cait, this is the moment. I want you to direct all the listeners towards any links, your book as well. Let people know about that. If you're on social media websites, plug away like crazy, please.
Yeah, so I write pretty regularly, or at least a few times a month on my blog, which is caitflanders.com. Cait is Cait, and then Flanders, like in Flanders Field. And the book is The Year of Less. It's out pretty much everywhere. Like there's been no international release date anywhere. Like I think it's out everywhere on January 16th. So you should be able to find it on whatever retailer site you use, or go and ask your library to get a copy, like I said. And then I do spend the most time on Instagram. It's the only platform I actually really enjoy. So it's just instagram.com/Cait Flanders.
Okay, and is there still there was some sort of like pre-order bonus or something with the book? Has that expired now, or is that still available?
It expires on the 15th, although it just one of the things will expire. So right now there's 3 bonuses. So one is a 3-part webinar series, and so 2 of them have already passed, and there's still one more on January 12th. So that's the part that will expire because people have watched the replays of them. That's available, but I find they're a bit timely. We talk about the holidays and getting ready for the new year and stuff like that. So I don't think I'll leave those up for everyone. And then there is also a piece of bonus audio. So it's about 33 minutes long, where I just talk about take it kind of behind the scenes of like how the book came together, and the challenging parts of writing it, and then what I'm hoping people take from it. And also there's a challenge is the last one. I just called it the month of less. So it's actually really, really simple. It'd be very interesting to hear from people who do it, because it's the idea, instead of banning yourself like from shopping for a year or anything for a year, the idea is doing 31-day bans and just really reflecting on it. So one of them is like no television for a day. That actually I think would be quite challenging for a lot of people, like not a single episode of anything for one day. As someone, I've done 30-day bans, it's hard. So, but yeah, just challenging yourself to stuff like that, one day at a time. And yeah, those are all available right now until January 15th, and then I'll probably just knock off the webinars after that.
Okay, cool. Well, as always, I will include links to all those things in the show notes. So yeah, that's about it. Cait Flanders, thank you very much.
Thank you. And you were right. I will say, you said before we got started that this would be the best interview I've done, and I will say I think that that's true.
Did I say that?
Yeah.
When did I say that?
I think on Instagram.
Oh yeah, it's a way of trying. I think that's the way of trying to
Yeah,
lure
yeah,
people in
yeah.
by promising them a really good interview. But I'm very flattered that you said that, and I'm going to keep that in as well. So, Cait, thank you very much.
Thank you.